Welcome everybody and good evening. My name is Naomi Hoffman. I am a South African Jewish academic and I will be chairing the session today. We're here today in solidarity with Tony Greenstein and because we care about the attacks on democracy, freedom, and human rights, both here in the UK and in Palestine. On 5 January 2026, Tony will go on trial at Kingston Crown Court in London, accused of support for terrorism for 4 tweets backing Palestinian resistance against colonial genocide. He is one of thousands who have been arrested under a government crackdown that redefines terrorism as opposition to the government's foreign policy. So we're going to have a number of speakers with us today. First, we'll have Andrew Feinstein, who was an ANC MP under Nelson Mandela's administration. He is a researcher into the global arms trade and stood against Starmer quite valiantly, I must add, in the last general election. Francisca Nadin is an ex-Palestine Action prisoner and spokesperson for Prisoners for Palestine. Claire Hinchcliffe is the mother of the Palestine Action activist Zoe Rogers and is involved in the Fulton 24 campaign. Huda Amori was co-founder of Palestine Action. Richard Medhurst was the first journalist arrested under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act. Tony is a Jewish anti-Zionist who's being prosecuted under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act. And Farhad Ansari is a solicitor who was arrested and detained by the counterterrorism police under Section 7 of the Terrorism Act. So we'll follow that order, and then at the end we will have space and time for questions and answers. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes to to talk, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Andrew, it's up to you.
Thanks very much, Nimi. And it both angers me that any of us have to be here, but I am also very pleased to be here in solidarity with Tony, with all of the current political prisoners in the United Kingdom, and with all of you who are suffering the consequences of our ever more fascist state that I'm embarrassed to say is run by my awful member of parliament, Keir Starmer. I think if an election were held today, the vast majority of people in his own constituency of Holborn and St Pancras would not just want to see Keir Starmer kicked out of number 10 Downing Street, kicked as far as possible out of our constituency, but I think many of us in the constituency would be delighted to take him to The Hague, where he should stand trial for war crimes, for genocide, and for effectively destroying Britain's democracy. Why do I say that? Well, at this point in our history, with the film released by Declassified UK late this afternoon about the British spy planes that have been flying over Gaza, the reality is that active participation and involvement in the world's first ever live screen genocide is government policy, whereas opposing the world's first live screen genocide is terrorism. In this country today, we are told what we can say, what we are allowed to think, and the reality is solidarity with the Palestinian people is verboten. The fact that the Terrorism Act is being used to silence voices like Tony's, to silence solidarity with the Palestinian people, is, in my opinion, one of the most shameful moments in the shameful history of British colonialism and British imperialism. For people like Nimi and myself, who come from South Africa, we know only too well that Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher described Nelson Mandela as a terrorist. In fact, Margaret Thatcher privately advised the apartheid South African government to have Nelson Mandela killed in jail because he was too powerful a figure to risk keeping alive. But even the odious Margaret Thatcher, who labeled freedom fighters like Nelson Mandela as terrorists, she never prescribed the ANC or the British organizations that supported it. She never prosecuted those protesting against and struggling against the racist apartheid system in South Africa. And let us not forget that that struggle against apartheid in South Africa, including in the United Kingdom, involved various forms of direct action, involved the constant expressions of solidarity and support of the type that Tony has led on behalf of the Palestinian people. Now, I suppose we have to ask ourselves the question, why is this happening? And there are obviously a myriad reasons that it's happening. But I think one of them is that in Britain today, the Britain of the loathsome Keir Starmer, we live in the best democracy money can buy, because our democracy is bought and paid for. And if one reads a recent book published by a colleague of mine, Paul Holden, called The Fraud, Keir Starmer, Morgan McSweeney, and the Crisis of British Democracy, you will understand the extent to which Britain and its governance is bought and paid for by supporters of Israel, by Israel lobbyists, and I would argue, directly and indirectly, by the state of Israel itself. They fund our MPs, they fund our political parties, and perhaps most important of all, like the odious Tony Blair, they fund our politicians, because when they leave office, they are guaranteed to become extraordinarily wealthy people as a consequence of the decisions and the policies that they introduced while in government. But there's another reason this is happening. Within the geopolitics of the world today, which are in so many instances driven by ethno-nationalism, of which Israel is, if you will, the poster child, that same geopolitics manifests at a domestic level, including in Britain, in an extreme inequality. Just yesterday, a global inequality report was released that showed that less than 60,000 people, 0.001% of the world's population, have 3 times as much wealth as the bottom 50% of all humanity. I mean, this is an absurdity that no civilized society or world would allow. And that manifests in Britain in the reality that today we have more billionaires than at any other time in our history, while more families require food banks to feed themselves than at any other time since the end of the Second World War. And the only way you sustain such deep systemic inequality, complicity in genocide, racism at home and abroad, is by increased repression, increased authoritarianism, and the undermining of actual democracy. Now, for those of us who have had to live under the yoke of Keir Starmer for 11 years now in his constituency, all we've seen happen is that his undemocratic and authoritarian instincts have been imposed on the country as a whole. And he is doing this in the service of people like Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. And it's for that reason that voices like Tony's, like Huda's, like Francesca's, like Fahad's, like Claire's are so vital and so important. And it is for this reason that we have a responsibility to support Tony in this indefensible case against him. And let me conclude by saying, it feels like a very dark time. But we shouldn't forget the words that Zoran Mamdani used when he beat the Democratic Party machinery and all its money in a city that has more Jewish residents than Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, New York City, to become that city's mayor. And he quoted Nelson Mandela, who, after his release from prison, was asked how he maintained faith during those long 27 years. And he said very simply, my trust in the majority of our people in this country, my trust in the majority of the people of the world, who will never, never stop standing in solidarity with us. He said, because anything is only impossible until it's done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We'll now move on to Francesca Nadin.
Hi, thank you. So I'm here to talk about the hunger strike that's happening at the moment. I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this are already aware of what's going on. So there are now 8 people in prison on an open-ended hunger strike here in Britain. 8 people that have been wrongly imprisoned as a result of alleged actions to stop arms exports from this country to continue the genocide in Palestine. And obviously, as part of this coordinated witch hunt, which everybody here speaking today is experiencing in different ways, they have been in prison and will be in prison without a conviction for an indefinite period of time that we still don't know about, how long it will be. And so after exhausting all the legal avenues to try and get freedom and justice, they felt like they've got no other choice but to take such drastic action as to go on hunger strike. And this is something that nobody wants to do. It's an incredibly testing thing, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And we're now in the danger zone. The 5 people have been sent to hospital already, and we expect that sadly to continue as their health deteriorates. And as we reach this critical moment in people's health, we also reach a critical moment in this campaign, which has been incredible. The amount of support and solidarity that we've seen surpassed all our expectations. And we call on everybody here listening to this to continue those efforts to show solidarity with the hunger strikers and support in any way that they can. Their demands are completely reasonable. I'm sure anyone would agree that there's nothing extreme about them. For example, to get bail before they are convicted, to have the right to a fair trial. We also need to talk about deprescription of Palestine Action, which is obviously they're accused of taking action with Palestine Action before it was prescribed, but they're still being treated as terrorists. And the most important one, this is what all of the hunger strikers say to us, don't forget that the most important demand is to shut Elbit down. So this is this Israeli-owned weapons company that operates on British soil, that produces around 85% of the drones that Israel uses to massacre Palestinian people. So this, beyond their own demands, the prisoners are using this as a rallying cry. They're saying to all of us, we can't do anything now because we're locked up in prison. You need to start taking action on our behalf. So I'd like to actually question, so I know the title of this is like terrorism, free speech is not terrorism, right? I actually want to question the use of that word altogether, because from its very beginning, it's been used to criminalize, to marginalize anyone who resists the colonial entity, whether it be Britain, Israel, in South Africa, in Ireland. This has been used for a very long time, and it's only now that it's starting to be used against the pro-Palestine movement. We've had a lot of conversations with ex-hunger strikers from Ireland who've explained this history to us, how these terrorism laws were and are still used against them. And it's something that we need to be talking about more. We know about our own colonial history from the other continents, but I believe from these conversations that I've been having, we don't talk anywhere near enough as we should do about Britain's role in Ireland, as a settler colonial state. So this is a really amazing opportunity for political education and to learn from those experiences. As Gary Donnelly himself said, who is a councillor in Derry, has been supporting us a lot. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So I would personally not even challenge that word, because it's completely illegitimate in the first place. So obviously, we're here. I went to prison. There's lots of other people in prison. Everybody took action, or allegedly took action, because we feel a duty as the unwilling benefactors of colonialism to act and say that this is not acceptable to us. We will not allow these arms to be continued to manufacture to send to Israel. And this is, I think, we can talk about the boomerang effect, right? So, for example, when Palestine was British mandated Palestine, this concept of administrative detention was introduced by the British. And it's still going on over there, obviously, in the worst possible way. But what's interesting to see now is that the British state is starting to use that on its own citizens. So we can see the colonial chickens coming home to roost. And not just with the prisoners, but like I say, with everybody else here who's talking today. So we've been doing a big campaign around speaking to MPs and journalists, all these kind of usual institutional things, which I think has been very useful, because we've seen a lot of support from within these institutions, which we actually weren't expecting. But despite that, we still haven't had any response from the government. They've lied constantly. They've refused any kind of interaction with us, and all the while people's health and lives are at risk. So as what the prisoners say to us, and as we've always believed, that now is the time to say enough of all this institutional stuff. We know what works. That's direct action. We know what the prisoners are saying to everybody. That is, go out and do direct action. And that's what needs to happen, because if not now, when actual British citizens, who sadly to a lot of people their lives are worth more than Palestinian lives, if now they're going to die in prisons right here in this country, if you're not going to do something now, when are you going to do it? So when there is this kind of repression that's happening, this incredible amount of repression, there's also resistance. People are so angry and so disgusted with what's going on. We're seeing more and more resistance. More and more people are being politicized. More and more people are willing to take this kind of action. So this is what I have to say to them, like, now is the time to do it. There's already groups that are taking this kind of action, or informing people about it. Obviously, Palestine Action doesn't exist anymore, but you can't prescribe a method of protest, can you? So there's a group, for example, that's called Direct Action Training. You can find them on Instagram, and they do workshops for educational purposes to find out more about these, about how to do direct action. And yes, that's all I can say. We'll continue fighting on behalf of the hunger strikers, and they stand firm in the knowledge that they will win their demands, and they're not going to stop until their demands have been won. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. It's wonderful to hear the kind of clarity and truthfulness with which you speak. Okay, we are now going to hear from Claire, who is the mother of the Palestine action activist Zoe Rogers.
Thank you. And Francesca, my heart goes out to all of you. It's so hard to think about what's going on. So my name is Claire. My daughter Zoe, she's 22 years old, and she's one of 6 people currently on trial at Woolwich Crown Court. And this is the first trial of the Filton 24. So right now she's in a prison van somewhere between the court and Surrey. She won't be able to eat this evening until 8 or 9 p.m. when they're finally taken back to prison. They spend more time in that van every day than they do in court. The trial process is absolutely brutal, and I'll say more about that in a moment. I just want to explain who the Filton 24 are, for those who don't know. I want to talk about why their case is so significant, and I want to talk about what's happening with the trial. So, and also just to say to follow Francesca, 4 of the Filton 24 are currently on hunger strike. So who are the Filton 24? In August last year, 6 activists got inside an Elbit Systems weapons factory in Filton, Bristol, including my daughter, then aged 20. And these are the 6 who are now on trial. So in that facility, they discovered a load of quadcopter drones packed up, ready for export. And they were able to put some of them out of action using sledgehammers, as well as causing in total £2 million worth of damage inside that factory. Now, 24 of them are charged with that same action. All of them remanded to prison, all refused bail. And the 6 currently on trial, including Zoe, have been in custody now for 16 months, which, by the way, is over twice, nearly 3 times the legal time limit for pre-trial. So why is this Filton 24 case so significant? Obviously, it's significant to me. I'm Zoe's mum, but we have to remember this is something it's significant for all of us. This is the first time a group of Palestine action activists faced counter-terror powers, and this is 2024 we're talking about. So the Crown Prosecution Service alleges that there is a terrorism connection, even though they're not charged under the Terrorist Act. And this appears to have been a first step towards proscribing Palestine action back in August 2024. And it's something the government was clearly looking for an excuse to do after all their talks with the Israeli embassy and Elbit Systems UK. And remember, they are able to do this because they're exploiting a dangerous loophole in the UK definition of terrorism that says mere property damage above a certain level with a political cause can count as terrorism. And there's so much injustice behind that. It's picked up in 2003 by the Supreme Court. It's never been dealt with. And this use of the definition of terrorism in this way, where no one is being harmed, we're not talking about violence against human beings, we're just talking about property damage. It's been criticised by human rights lawyers all over the world and UN experts. In fact, the Filton case was described as a litmus test for UK democracy by international human rights lawyers. It's also, the Filton 24 case is right at the heart of the proscription battle. And that's one of the reasons it's so significant right now. So how's it going? They're in the middle of their trial, the first 6. It's absolutely brutal. The conditions for the defendants are brutal. So bear in mind they've been in prison for 16 months. It's made it really hard for them to prepare. It's very hard to have time with your barrister to get ready for giving evidence. Once they're in the course of the trial, they're woken up at 5. It takes 2.5 hours sometimes to get to court. They're always late. They don't get time before court with their barristers, and the judge has been really, really difficult, not helping them at all. In fact, there's a lot I cannot say about this judge, about this trial until it's over. And I think people will be shocked when they hear all the ways that the judge has put obstacles in front of the defendants. And I look forward to being able to talk about that. But what we can say, it's very obvious, is that prejudicial comments by Yvette Cooper and others have made this an unfair trial. Making reference to the Filton case before their evidence has been heard by a jury is completely unacceptable. And the mere fact that Palestine Action is proscribed, these were Palestine Action activists, that's already made it an unfair trial and prejudiced the jury. But I'm delighted to say that despite all of that, the trial, in my opinion, is going incredibly well. We've got amazing defence barristers, and it's been incredible to watch this trial in action. I've been in the court most days. So first of all, the prosecution narrative that the 6 activists on trial right now planned and enacted violence against Elbit security and police has been dramatically undermined when the guards and the police were cross-examined on the stand. There's a very different narrative emerging. We're seeing footage of Elbit guards being violent, assaulting the activists with the tools that they confiscated from them. One Elbit guard, Angelo Volante, was sorry, I'm unfortunately having to reject a call from my daughter. Don't worry, she will call me back. One guard, Angelo Volante, was seen on footage attacking defendant Jordan Devlin on 3 separate occasions, including slamming the handle of a sledgehammer into his face and chest, leaving Jordan with bruises all over his body. On each of those 3 occasions, Jordan was empty-handed. Sam Corner is charged with assaulting a police officer with a sledgehammer, and that's been talked about again and again in prejudicial statements by ministers. This happened in the midst of the violent attack on Jordan, and also Sam had just been sprayed in the eyes with Parva spray. It's very dangerous and blinding. Sam is autistic. He describes being overwhelmed with panic. I recommend reading the full account on Real Media. Please look up Real Media. They're in the court and describing every detail every day. What it clearly wasn't was a planned, premeditated, intended attack. That story is just unraveling before our eyes. All the defendants are emphatic that they were committed to non-violence, had firmly decided beforehand not to harm anyone. They had their red lines in place. And what's beautiful now, we've finished with the prosecution, now the defendants are taking the stand, and these 6 beautiful souls are getting to tell their stories to the courtroom. I'll give you an example. Charlotte Head, age 29, has been on the stand. She spent 3 years volunteering in her early 20s in the Calais jungle, and she was working for a domestic abuse charity when she was arrested inside the Filton factory. To say that she's against violence is an understatement. She has devoted her adult life so far to selflessly serving victims of violence and injustice, and her compassion lit up the room. So the trial continues. I think I'm out of time now. The trial continues. Come to Woolwich Crown Court every Friday. We've got something on tomorrow. There'll be speeches outside. Sometimes there's room in the public gallery to witness this trial. We'll probably get a verdict mid-January. And I'm optimistic because it's the jury. It's down to the jury, not the British injustice system. And I wish them. We're all praying so much that there is justice in this case. I'm just going to finish with a quote from Zoe. This is a statement she made before the trial began. I think it's a good way to end. She says, "This trial is a farce. I wouldn't be here if my country simply followed international law. But to be clear, we are not victims. We are simply collateral damage in the government's single-minded determination to put its business interests and its relationship with Israel first as it partners in the slaughter of Palestinians." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. And please, if you need to go take a call with your daughter, it's important.
Next time she rings, I'll hop off.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, Huda, you're up.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you, Tony, for arranging this, and full solidarity to you ahead of your trial in January. I think it's been insane to see how after October 7th, just how much Palestine solidarity activists have been attacked across the country, from first using Section 12(1)(a) of the Terrorism Act to crack down on people tweeting or giving speeches, to calling people who take direct action or punishing them under the Terrorism Act as well. I'm actually going to change the order of what I was going to say based on what Claire said, because I think it's important. Not all of the details of what is really behind the Palestine Action prescription have been given enough light on them. And one of the key reasons that they prescribed us, which is in the papers which I got through the judicial review, is that they said that basically because actionists, people who take action, Palestine Action, kept getting acquitted, that was a reason to prescribe Palestine Action. And to me, and I think to most ordinary people, that statement is just completely insane. So because people were being acquitted in front of juries of committing any crime, and they were not guilty of committing any crime, then it's okay to call them terrorists. And that was one of the reasons that they used to actually prescribe Palestine Action. Essentially, it was because Palestine Action was effective. It was effective at damaging the Israeli war machine. Many people probably know Palestine Action started in 2020 and had taken repeated direct action, mainly against Elbit Systems, Israel's biggest weapons manufacturer, and firms associated with Elbit Systems. That included occupations, break-ins, blockades, and other tactics used in order to materially disrupt the Israeli weapons industry. It wasn't about appealing to others to create those changes. We were sick and tired of that. It was about going straight to the source and stopping these machines from being able to be made to massacre people in Palestine or build weapons which have first been tested. Elbit would use Gaza as use Gaza as a testing ground for their weapons, which they would then market for other governments across the world. And Elbit Systems had several factories and offices across Britain. Thankfully, over the years, the amount of Elbit factories has reduced. Palestine Action shut down 3 Israeli weapons sites before prescription, and even after prescription, it came out that actually the Bristol headquarters was also shut down. That came out about a month after prescription due to the amount of disruption which had already been inflicted on the premises. There were also over a dozen companies which were forced to cut ties with Elbit Systems, including banks which had divested from the company. This was a strategy, it was a tactic that was winning. It was a tactic and strategy that was focused on the Israeli weapons industry. So when we look at why Palestine Action was prescribed, we basically have to look at everyone being annoyed, which was a lot of powerful people, including the Israeli government, Elbit Systems, and their lobby groups. And they have a lobby group called CMS Strategic, which planted the full story that Palestine Action was receiving funding from Iran, which was a complete lie. Pro-Israel lobby groups such as We Believe in Israel and other pro-Israel lobby groups similar to that. Donald Trump as well, in the midst of it, Palestine Action had wrecked his golf course in Scotland in order to show solidarity with the Palestinians when he was talking about making Gaza into his Trump Riviera, and people had destroyed the golf course and it was out of action. It's actually the most expensive golf course in the United Kingdom. And Trump had a call with Starmer towards the end of March. And right after this phone call, he had tweeted that Palestine Action were terrorists and thanked Starmer for his cooperation and that he was going to, use the full force of the law against these terrorists, as he called them. So it shows just how this government is willing to completely curtail the rights of its own citizens in order to protect a foreign genocidal regime. That is exactly what has happened here. They also used a lot of smears to try and justify the ban, such as the Iranian funding and many more. And in the midst of that, they did prejudice the Filton trial and denied them the right to a fair trial. They used 3 different actions to justify calling Palestine Action a terrorist organisation. One was an action that happened in 2022. It was an occupation of a French weapons firm called Thales. And they wrongly said that they had caused over £1 million worth of damage, when actually the majority of that was lost revenue. But most interesting is that it came out that counter-terrorism in Scotland had already had a meeting and said that there's never been a terrorist incident by Palestine Action in Scotland. So they just completely made that up retrospectively. They were never charged anything to do with terrorism at the time. They made it up completely retrospectively in order to justify the ban. The other 2, one is the Filton action and another is the Instro action, where they cost one of Elbit's factories in Kent, Instro position, over £1 million in damages. Both of those actions are yet to go to trial. And as we know, the Filton action is still going through the trial process. But what they have done, which is unprecedented, is that they've used the fact that there's a clause in the Terrorism Act which says that property damage for a political cause can be considered to be terrorism. Serious property damage. Serious is undefined. There is no definition under that clause. So they've used that for the first time in order to justify banning Palestine Action. But if this is allowed to stand, it means that any action or any group that engages in any property damage could potentially also be prosecuted under the Terrorism Act, or also be prescribed. You know, sometimes you throw red paint on a building and they will say they will come up with ridiculous figures, but they'll say it's hundreds of thousands of pounds. This has happened to all different types of activist groups, and yet they've used this for the first time only against Palestine Action, which is one of the grounds that we are arguing that the prescription is unlawful, is that it's discriminatory towards Palestine Action because they're only using it on the group that took direct action for Palestine. And it kind of goes back to what Francesca was saying before. The Terrorism Act is constantly used to protect colonizers and to protect the occupation of Palestine. That is how it's been used when they label people who are legitimately resisting an occupation as terrorists, the same that they are now using that against us to say that citizens of British citizens who take action to disrupt the Israeli weapons industry are also smeared as being terrorists. This label has only been used to crush dissent. That is the only purpose for it. And I think that's become very clear because of the prescription of Palestine Action. And I think that they are already coming to regret banning the group. And I think that they will regret it much more in the near future, because the truth is they have made Palestine Action into a household name. They have put a spotlight on the prisoners who are being imprisoned for up to 2 years on remand before they even get to trial, who took action to disrupt the weapons used to commit genocide. They are putting a spotlight on the fact that this government prioritizes Israeli interests, the interest of a foreign genocidal regime over the rights and freedoms of their own citizens, not just our rights to protest, but even our rights to hold signs. And now in the case of the hunger strikes, they are saying that they are willing to allow people to suffer irreparable harm in order to protect a genocidal regime. This is what is happening in our day and age. And it takes everyone to resist against this. It is absolutely insane that any of these people are in prison, that any of us have to talk about the Terrorism Act or being wrongly labeled as terrorists when the Israeli regime is continuing to commit a genocide in Gaza, backed by our government, backed by the US. So we must resist. We must not be silent. And I believe that we are going to win sooner rather than later. And I can't wait to see all of those responsible held to account.
You're muted.
Oh, let me repeat, just to say thank you so much, Huda. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think Richard is not here, so we are going to go straight on to you, Tony.
Okay, thank you, Nimi. I will in fact be up at Kingston Crown Court tomorrow. There's a pre-hearing trial, and my presence has been requested or demanded. So anyone who wants to pop along to Kingston Crown Court from 10 o'clock is welcome. But my trial will begin, although there's an application for delay, on the 5th of January. One of the things we will be applying for tomorrow is actually whether the prosecution itself should go ahead, because in order to prosecute me and others, the permission of the Attorney General is required. But the Attorney General declares in the Jewish Chronicle that dear members of his family were serving in the Israeli Defense Forces or the occupation forces. So he handed that to the Solicitor General, a woman by the name of Sarah Sackman, who was a long-standing vice chair of the Jewish Labour movement, which targeted me and other people in the Labour Party as wicked anti-Semites. So she is clearly compromised. So we will see whether the judge in my trial allows those arguments or finds a pretext for avoiding them. But it's clear that the whole apparatus of the legal officers is compromised. But I also wanted to say something about those very brave hunger strikers that we have. And it is this: David Lammy has pretended that he knew nothing about it when we know, of course, that he did. But Lammy and this government can put an end to the hunger strike literally tomorrow. In 1972, the dockers went on strike in the London docks, and 5 dockers were jailed for contempt of court by what was then known as the National Industrial Relations Court, and they were put into Pentonville Prison. The TUC was forced to call a general strike, and other workers were already downing tools. And lo and behold, someone who had never before been heard of, called the official solicitor, made an application to the Court of Appeal for their release. And not surprisingly, it was granted and they were freed the very same day. Exactly the same mechanism can be used. The official solicitor can make an application to the appeal court or the High Court to have all those on remand, including the hunger strikers, freed on bail. It takes absolutely no effort at all. So if anyone were to die, we can say quite clearly that their blood is on the hands of Starmer, Lammy, Mahmoud, and all the others in this rotten Labour so-called administration. And I want to really go back, to my own arrest, which was on the 20th of December 2023, because at about 6:30 in the morning, there was a knock on my door and the police arrived. And I was quite bleary-eyed, as you might expect, having just gone to bed. And they said, we have to arrest you. And when I inquired as to what it was for a tweet I'd posted a month before. And not surprisingly, I wasn't in full possession of what that tweet might be. But it is almost incredible, because the only words I could utter at that stage was, this is Orwellian. And it is Orwellian that people can be arrested at their home in dawn raids, which are usually reserved for bank robbers and people like that, or people who are dangerous murderers, etc., for a tweet posted a month before. And that shows the authoritarian climate that we are now in, that free speech on Palestine is considered so dangerous that about 12 police officers from the counter-terror police and Sussex Constabulary have to visit you in a dawn raid. And we might ask, why is it that the police prioritise an obscure clause under the 2000 Terrorism Act when, for example, according to the Rape Crisis Centre, rape in this country has virtually been decriminalised. The Rape Crisis Centre said there were 55,000 rapes that were reported in 2019. There were just 1,659 prosecutions and 702 convictions. So you would have to be really, really unlucky if you were a rapist to be convicted for that. But if you say anything out of place, you can be guaranteed the government will be upon you like a ton of bricks. And I also went back to the debate on the Terrorism Act itself, the Terrorism Act 2000, and the debate was on the 14th of December 1999 in the House of Commons. And just let me say that I don't think there's any need whatsoever for any terrorism acts, because anything terrorists do, and I mean terrorists in the genuine sense, like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, who deliberately inflict terror and attack civilians, such as the Manchester Arena bombing or the Bataclan massacre in Paris, I think they can quite legitimately be classified as terrorists by groups, incidentally, which would not exist but for things like the invasion of Iraq or the Western meddling in Afghanistan. Jack Straw, see what then was, a particularly infamous figure in Labour history, introduced the act, and immediately Douglas Hogg from the Conservative opposition, a former minister in the Home Office, and then chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, asked, "Am I right in thinking the actions of the Kosovo Liberation Army, or for that matter, those of the Kurds fighting Saddam Hussein in North Iraq, fall within the scope of the terrorism as defined in the Terrorism Act?" And Jack Straw replied, "Although Clause 1, which defines terrorism, has a wider coverage than the current arrangements for Irish and international terrorism, such activities are already covered in existing definitions." And he went on to say that the broadening of the bill covers domestic terrorism. So really, this bill had no application at all to so-called terrorism, which isn't in fact terrorism, in places like Palestine. This has been a reinterpretation and reapplication of the Act as time has gone by. And then another figure who some people might remember, Jeremy Corbyn, intervened and said that my understanding is that under this bill, the ANC office in London would have been closed down on that basis, and the ANC banned in Britain as a terrorist organisation. And Tom King intervened. He's a former defence minister, and sorry, was the chairman of the Intelligence and Security Committee. And he said we come up against exactly the problem that the Honourable Member for Islington North mentioned. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And that, of course, is exactly it. Because this is a principle that is a long run through colonial history, that some people will see groups as terrorists and others will see them as freedom fighters. And we can go back to the Second World War, for example. The Nazis called the French resistance and the Polish resistance and the Czech and the Yugoslav resistance bandits or terrorists. But none of us would have seen them. And the British did not see them then, and the British government. So it is an entirely subjective matter. There is nothing objective which defines, for example, Hamas as a terrorist group. It is a resistance group. It came out of the Palestinians. It doesn't operate and never has operated overseas. There's never been an operation by Hamas in Britain. So the reason for prescribing it is simply a matter of British foreign policy, because we are wedded hand and foot to the Israeli state. We supply weapons to it, we provide intelligence to it, overflying RAF flights and so on. We have, in essence, the military alliance with them. And that is why we brand the enemy of Israel as terrorists. There is no other reason. It has no objective reason in terms of terrorism itself. And I do think there is such a thing as terrorism, but Hamas and Hezbollah do not fit the bill. They are resistance organizations which Britain, in conjunction with the United States, has defined as terrorists for their own partisan reasons. And I think we have to be clear about that, and we have to try and get those arguments across, as I will try to do in my own trial. That I know that Fahad is involved at the moment in the deprescription of Hamas, and I hope it goes well, though I suspect that the judiciary won't look kindly on the application. But I think we should be quite clear. You might not agree with Hamas, and I don't, on many things, and I've made that clear in my own blog and writings, but they are not a terrorist group. They are a resistance organization which springs out of the Palestinians, who are the victims of Israeli terrorism. And that is the other point, of course, that nowhere has there been any attempt to define the Israeli state or any other state as state terrorist. And terrorism today, in its overwhelming majority, is carried out by states, whether it's the Israeli state, Myanmar, Burma, or other favourite states of the West. And of course, we have now the creep of terrorism. It's not simply armed groups, but Palestine Action, which has been prescribed. And as I said, I think that is beginning to backfire and has backfired on the British state, because we have over 3,000 people rather, arrested for being terrorists, most of them over the age of 60, and some of them barely able to walk, but one of them is blind, but nonetheless, they are all terrorists. And that, if you like, brings it into ridicule the whole notion of what is defined as terrorism in this country. And I hope that despite the imposition of three stooge judges, all with connections to Israel, in a completely blatant maneuver you would think that even Keir Starmer isn't capable of, the previous judge, Martin Chamberlain, was replaced literally at the last moment because they feared he might actually approach something like fairness. But that is the nature of the system that we are in. And we have to be clear that when the ruling class talks about terrorism, it is, in the words of John Dugard, an ad hoc judge of the International Court of Justice, a bid to discredit and silence opponents. They did it with Mandela, they did it with the ANC, and today they're doing it with Palestinian organizations. And we have to push back against this attempt to brand any opposition to what the government believes as terrorists. It is not. It's about freedom of speech. And we know that when it comes to freedom of speech, historically in Britain, the judges have never been our friends. Freedom of speech has been won despite the judges, not because of them. And historically, most of the organizations which were involved in direct action, whether it's the suffragettes or the Chartists or trade unionists, they've all in their time been considered as terrorists. I mean, certainly the suffragettes who tried to bomb Lloyd George's house and attacked him physically and burnt down a racecourse stand, etc., would have been defined as terrorists if there had been a terrorism act in play. And yet, on the very day that Palestine Action was prescribed by Yvette Cooper, she appeared on the benches of the House of Commons dressed in the purple colours of the suffragettes. So I think we should be clear as well. The hypocrisy of our own ruling class is never ending. They paid tribute to those who took direct action a century and more ago. But when it comes to today, they cannot see the wood for the trees. I think I've probably said about as much as I can, but Again, I would just emphasize I have a trial starting on the 5th of January, although we are applying for its delay because of a Supreme Court case which is pending. So it may be delayed, I'm not sure. But I shall be in court tomorrow, seeing if we can get it pushed back anyway, because of the improper intervention of the Solicitor General. So thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who has contributed so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. So I should probably just mention, because Tony is too humble and modest, to ask anybody who can please come to his trial between the 5th and the 10th of January in London. Please do come. We have your email addresses. We'll send out an email. We also have a website that we're working on. We'll share information after tonight. But yeah, Tony needs it. He needs the sense of solidarity and care. And that's how we get through this time, right? Is with political love. Okay, Fahad, you are up.
Hi, Bismillah. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you, Tony, for organizing the space for this. I think it's really important. It feels like a therapy session where we're all sitting together talking about our cases. So I wanted to just pick up on some of the stuff that came up and not really talk about my case. I mean, the fact that they've come for the lawyers now just tells you everything you need to know about Britain today. That's sort of the last line of defense. Normally, I'd be sitting in rooms with each one of you and advising you about your rights, but now I've had to get my own lawyers who are advising me. And we didn't wake up in this society. It's not like we woke up in 2025 and realized, oh my gosh, it's a police state. This has been happening for decades, and I think it was mentioned about in the Irish context, but even within the British context from 2000, even before 9/11, all of this kicked off with the Terrorism Act 2000. And I think we have to be brutally honest with ourselves, all of us who are fighting these battles now, and ask ourselves where were we on the front lines of these battles in the initial stages, 2000, the war and terror years, when the most horrific excesses on civil liberties were taking place, and most people were very, very silent about it. That could be because of, I don't know, prejudices. It could be because of it didn't matter, it didn't affect anybody else. But the Muslim community felt it and have been feeling it for a hell of a long time. If we look at the kind of stuff we talk about today with the PAL action stuff, with the Defend Our Jury stuff, we're talking about prescription, we're talking about freedom of speech. This webinar is all about freedom of speech, talking about the use of secret evidence, lengthy period on remand for small, like criminal damage, essentially. But we've been through this. I mean, the prescription regime came in 2000, 25 years ago. And if the argument is that prescription is wrong because it stifles free speech, it dehumanizes, it stops having nuanced conversations about political violence, then why did we not challenge it at that time? And I'm not blaming anybody. Some of us may not have been around, but generally society allowed this to come in. Because prescription, when it came in, again, as has been pointed out, immediately as a tool of foreign policy. It wasn't that these groups, the vast majority of groups that were prescribed, posed any threat to Britain in any way. They prescribed groups like the PKK, Hamas, well, not even Hamas, the political side, the military side, the Qassam brigades, the LTTE in Sri Lanka, Islamic Jihad. None of these groups posed any threat to Britain, and yet they were prescribed because they wanted to do a favor to their allies around the world. Prescription just became more entrenched. We had the political wings of Hamas and Hezbollah prescribed some years ago. Again, very little movement, very little outcry from the community and from the movement. 2 years ago, Hizb ut-Tahrir, an Islamic political party, avowedly non-violent, were prescribed because of one statement about the 7th of October. And they were prescribed, and again, very little movement from even within the Muslim community about that. So we sort of allowed this to happen. We talk about freedom of speech. We have had laws in this country for 2 decades now where people have been criminalized for terrorism, for selling books, for downloading publications of the internet. There's something before Section 12 became so famous, we had something called Section 57 and 58 of the Terrorism Act, which made it a terrorism offense to be in possession of an item that could be useful to a terrorist. And all sorts of young people were being picked up on this because they had maps of the London Underground in their possession. People had downloaded academic manuals, wild camping manuals, just normal stuff that you would have, but people are being prosecuted with this type of evidence for terrorism. In 2001, after 9/11, you had foreign nationals who were interned for 4 years without charge. I mean, 4 years without charge until the House of Lords said this is unlawful. And the reason they said it was unlawful was not because it was completely immoral and unlawful to detain people without charge, but because the fact that it only applied to foreigners, it didn't apply to British people. So what they did, they brought in the control order regime, which applied equally to Brits and foreigners, where you could be stuck in your house, not allowed to move beyond a 1 mile boundary, prohibited from having visitors, prohibited access to electronic devices. All of this without charge, without trial, just completely a complete erosion of civil liberties. And again, very few people were talking about these things. So we have deprivation of citizenship. The first person famously deprived was Abu Hamza, who may have said some controversial things, let's say, but it didn't mean he needed to have his citizenship taken away. But it came down to an issue of freedom of speech. He was British. They wanted to deport him. They said, how can we? We can't because he's a British citizen. So let's take away his citizenship. Why? Because of, despite him being convicted of incitement offenses, so that was the right thing to do, is to prosecute him and then, convict him if he's found guilty. But after that, to take away his citizenship on top of that. Again, because Abu Hamza was so dehumanized in the public psyche and he fit the perfect caricature of the pantomime villain with his one eye and a hook on his hand, everybody stayed quiet. Again, even in his trial, you had Muslims who were brought in to testify against him, and you couldn't find a Muslim imam who would actually stand as a witness for him. Ironically, I think they did find a priest and a rabbi who were his defense witnesses. So all of this has come in. Again, and the reason I think it's important to recognize this is that when we talk about Palestine now, and even the issue of resistance, we lost a lot of ground over the last 20 years, which has enabled them to carry on the way they've been doing. Some of you might be familiar with the case of Umar Gul or Muhammad Gul. So Muhammad Gul was a student who was convicted of encouraging terrorism because he uploaded videos of military operations by insurgent forces in Iraq and Afghanistan against the American British troops. So tanks blowing up, so all military targets, but during tanks blowing up, helicopters being struck with missiles, that kind of stuff, IEDs going off. He was prosecuted for terrorism, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, who said, well, it's still terrorism, because even if it's in a military context, even if the military target, it still fits the definition of terrorism. Again, that is the basis which Tony and everybody else have been prosecuted now, because the definition is so broad and it's been accepted because there was no public outcry. I mean, with the exception of Cage and the Islamic Human Rights Commission and some select others, this thing was just, we've sleptwalked into this society that we're in at the moment. And again, a lot of this is based on secret evidence. The Guardian ran a really good piece about Huda's case and how she had to leave the room because they were relying on secret evidence, and there's outrage. It happened to me in my case as well recently. But this has been on the books for 25 years in this country. It came in 2000 again, and it used to be just applied in the national security context to SIAC for these sort of citizenship deprivation cases. But then, about a decade ago, they've rolled out this procedure into every regime, every court regime. So you can have it in family courts, in administrative cases, judicial reviews. It's even been used in traffic courts. Traffic courts, they've used secret evidence, employment tribunals. So again, no outcry, no real pushback about what was happening because it didn't affect everybody. So that brings us up to the 7th of October. If I asked you guys before the 7th of October, how many people had been convicted of Section 12 offences, what would the answer be? Section 12 has been on the books since 2000. So it's 25 years this has been on the books. By the 7th of October, it's been there 23 years. Not a single person had been convicted of a Section 12 offence. There'd been barely any arrests in Section 12. The most people were getting done for was Section 13. So people who had flags of the PKK or badges of the PKK were getting done for Section 13, which is what a lot of the protesters who are carrying the placards saying I support Palestine Action are getting done for. It's an easier one to prove because you just have to show that you are carrying something that indicated to someone that you support a prescribed group. But in terms of expressing an expression of belief or support for an organization, that one as Tony's being done under, and many others, no one had been convicted. Hardly anyone was being arrested because it was so hard to prove. But then 7th of October happened, and suddenly there's a huge escalation in arrests, in charges, in prosecutions for this. And it all goes back to Palestine. It all goes back to Palestine. It goes back to the definition of terrorism, the fact that the definition is so broad, it covers military action. The fact that Hamas is prescribed in its entirety means you even lose that distinction, saying I support the political wing and they've got their movement, they're a main player in the conversation. You can't have that nuanced discussion even about, well, can you even say that Hamas is not a terrorist group, or would that breach Section 12? In our own case, when we were bringing the deprescription application, so many people, lawyers, were giving us advice saying you can't say this, you can't even go and have that press conference, for example, that might be a problem. Someone might say, well, you're going beyond the scope of what's legally required in bringing the deprescription application. And there's so much scaremongering and so much self-censorship, and understandable to a degree, but it's that self-censorship and that refusal to take a stand that is why we are where we are today. So when I see people like Huda, like Tony, like the Filton 24, like especially the 800 strikers taking these stances and pushing back, that is what is needed. Because if we don't have the people like you guys, the courageous people who are on the front lines pushing back, God help us where we're going. I mean, Lami's already straight away abolishing jury trials. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the same week he makes that announcement, there was jurors who were acquitted of Hastings 3. There was what's her name her name escapes me in Jersey. She won her trial. She got acquitted. So people are basically winning their cases because jurors can see it, like with the Palestine Action cases. Jurors are human beings. They can empathize with you. They can understand you. They can understand what a genocide is. And if you remove that power from the people, from the public, and you take away legitimate defenses, which they've done already, now you're taking away jurors, you're just left with judges. And when they don't like the judges, as we've seen in the Palestine Action case, you just replace the judge and bring in a panel which is going to be more sympathetic to the government. So this is the terrain we're in. They are now at the point where they're detaining lawyers like me. The reason they detained me, which they haven't told me publicly because it's secret, but it's pretty obvious. I was never detained for representing people accused of being members of Al Qaeda or ISIS. Yet when I represent the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, I'm suddenly being reported to my regulator. I'm being investigated with a view to striking me off, taking my license away. Had my work phone taken. They're looking at communications. They're trying to find anything and everything to try to implicate me or find intelligence on my clients, which is even more problematic. Where do we go from here? I think we collectively already know where we have to go. We have to stand and we have to push back. I was particularly inspired, and I'll end on this because I know Tony wants some time for Q&A. When it all kicked off I think it was around in April, May time, and I was under severe pressure. I got a message. I came across a message on Instagram. It was a birthday message from Zara, from the Filton 18 at that time. And she said something really poignant, and it stuck with me. And it's words that help me get through every day if I think things are becoming a bit difficult. She said, if at this stage of the genocide, you're not feeling the weight of the oppressor's foot on your neck, then you are complicit. And so if we are in that situation, let's remember that it means we are doing something effective to stop this genocide, to stop the apartheid, to liberate Palestine. And we never, ever, ever regret a single step we've taken towards that objective. So solidarity with all of you, Tony. I'm going to try to make it to your trial if it's not postponed. And I hope everybody gets through this. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. Palestine will be free. It's just a matter of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Fahad. That was incredible. Okay, so we have some time for Q&A. And we have some questions in the Q&A box. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read them. And then we also have some people who've raised their hands who would like to speak. Let me just double check, Tony. Should we ask people to type their questions in the Q&A?
It
Tony?
might be better, but it's
Okay.
really up to you, Chair.
Okay.
But if they can keep it brief, I think would be
Okay.
best.
Okay, so let me say this. Sahida and Mike, you've both raised your hands to speak. Can you type your questions in the Q&A? And while you do so, we'll go through some of the questions that are already there, okay? Okay, so Terry Bell had a comment for Andrew. I think Andrew already responded to this, actually. He said, Andrew should comment here about the fact that Starmer et al. Have legislatively exceeded even the apartheid regime in South Africa. In apartheid times, support of a prescribed terrorist organization was a significantly lesser charge than terrorism. How's that for New Labour? And I think Andrew spoke a lot about, the kind of the kind of close connection between the states and the arms sector and Israel. Mike asks, given that we want to build unity to achieve maximum impact and ultimate success, how do we avoid weakening our message through the different tactics adopted by various sections of our movement? How, in particular, do we involve and engage those who support our stance but are afraid or unsure about how to contribute? I almost feel like that's one for you, Huda, but also Fahad and Tony, if you want to come in.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a bit tricky, but I've said the same thing about this probably for years. And sorry, I've got something cool for my computer, which is whilst we want and we should expect I don't think the vast majority of the public do stand against genocide. I think that's very clear, especially after the past 2 years. I think the majority of people do stand with Palestine. I think the importance of what we should be looking at in terms of public support is how you take those people into active beings who are actively participating in the fight against genocide, in the fight against Israeli apartheid and what is happening to the Palestinian people. And it's that really counts. How do you activate those people into beings that are taking an active role in participating to stop these acts? Because, we already have a huge amount of people on side. It's about those people and more people. And unfortunately, in this day and age, the risk you have to take in order to actively support the Palestinian people is increasing by the day. When we see how much the repression is happening, is increasing by the day. But also when we look at what's happening to the Palestinian people and the price that they have to pay, it is still incomparable to what Palestinians are facing on a daily basis. So we need to ask more of those who are engaged and to increase those who are engaged into taking a more active role. And often that does involve risk. It does involve an element of sacrifice. Every struggle already has. We do not necessarily have to appease everyone, because when you do that, you dilute a movement, you dilute the strong parts of the movement, the parts which are most actively resisting against against the oppressors, that is by default diluted by trying to appeal to absolutely everyone in the public. It just doesn't work like that. People need to be more supportive of those taking the higher amounts of risk, engaging in direct action, engaging in resistance. And we don't need absolutely everyone. We just need enough people to actively engage in some form of resistance against the oppressors.
Yeah, I think we have to ask why we have these attacks, whether it's on Farhad, myself, Huda, or Natalie in Jersey, or whoever. And it's because the British government does not want opposition to its own support for genocide, and it wants to defeat that opposition. We had that at the very beginning of the mass protests, demonstrations in London, when Suella Braverman came out with "These are hate speeches." And then, of course, the Metropolitan Police has done its best to clamp down, refuse to allow people to demonstrate outside Britain's main propaganda organisation, the BBC, and so on. So I think we need to bear that in mind. The question is sometimes how we connect with people. And it seems the demonstrations and the protests against the prescription of Palestine action, which was pushed for by the various Zionist lobby organisations. They got a petition together with about 8,000 people, if I remember rightly. They want to clamp down and silence us. And that means we have to speak out. And therefore, the willingness of 3,000 or more people, I think it's far more, in fact, because they haven't arrested many people, is a sign that people are willing to defy the law when that law is simply seen as an instrument of coercion and that it's an attack on our democratic rights. People do value their democratic rights, the right to speak out, freedom of speech, and so on. So, I mean, that is one point of connection. And then you can also, of course, raise the reason why they're doing that. And that's obviously related to the genocide in Palestine, the fact that we are actually supplying arms for the genocide, and point out the utter hypocrisy that we have an International Criminal Court Act of 2001, which makes aiding, being ancillary to a genocide, a criminal offence punished, I think, by 30 years imprisonment. So by all rights, if the law was applied fairly, Starmer, Yvette Cooper, David Lammy, and the rest would be spending 30 years inside Pentonville. And even if they were released on license, they would still be spending over a decade. But of course, that's not going to happen because the law is applied selectively against the enemies of the state. And they also have a fallback position, which is for any prosecution to go ahead, the Attorney General, the law officers, must approve of it. And that means, therefore, the government can veto any prosecution of itself because it's in charge of the process, which shows how corrupt these things really are. But I think we should welcome the campaign against Palestine Action's prescription because it has involved so many thousands of people. Thank you.
Fahad, any comments here? Okay, maybe not. He looks a bit frozen. All right, so moving on to the next. There's some lovely comments in the Q&A. Just sending solidarity with you, Tony, with the hunger strikers. Just saying that they're committed and amazing and inspiring the world. And Jean Doherty asked, does anyone know if why it's Amu, John, and Louis having a bail hearing tomorrow or any more details about it? So who did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so those three, it's a part of the Bryce Norton case. So that was the action on June 20th against the two British military planes at RAF Bryce Norton. And so they will have a separate case to the Filton 24. So their bail hearing is tomorrow at 11:30 at the Old Bailey. And I think it's important to say that those people have been in prison since July, and their trial is set for January 2027. And what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to have a pre-trial detention limit of 6 months, and then they have to explain why they need to keep you in. But because they are accusing these people of having a terrorism connection, it's much easier for the judges to surpass those rights and to keep them in for extraordinary amounts of time before they've even got to trial, been able to speak in front of a jury, explain their actions in that way. So that is happening tomorrow at the Old Bailey. And those three are on hunger strike at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Huda. Moving on, there's a question from Mike. He's asked several times about building unity, and he said that it's difficult for him to type out his answers. So I'm going to let him speak for a minute, okay? Hold on a moment, Mike. I'm going to open that up for you. Give me 1 second. I'll open the mic in 1 moment. Okay. So I'm gonna give you like just a minute to talk. Okay, Mike? Go for it. Oh,
Right, I found the button. Sorry about that. Yes. So I want to, in my minutes, I want to say, Tony, thank you for the unnecessary plug. I'm the blind guy in the wheelchair who was on the demonstrations, who has been arrested 4 times. I just want to know, really, because I think we're at a crucial point right now, how we build unity right now. It's easy to create divisions with organizations like PSC, who we can criticize for not doing enough and all the rest of it. How do we ensure that we build the maximum unity in order to achieve victory in this situation? That was it. That's all my question was, really. I could say a lot more, Tony, like yourself, but that's all I really wanted to ask in this meeting. Thank you.
thank you so much, Mike. And sorry for making you wait. Thank you. Okay. On the issue of unity, Huda, Fahad, Tony, go for it.
It's always a difficult question, and I think the one thing that unites us is obviously Palestine, but everyone's got a different methodology. And what people need to realize is that in this struggle, you don't publicly criticize and condemn somebody else for their actions if you disagree with it, if it's for the cause of Palestine. So people might not agree with direct action, they might not agree with Palestine action. And they can have those conversations behind closed doors. But once they publicly go out and start attacking them or distancing themselves, or saying this isn't something that's helpful and we shouldn't do it, that destroys unity. Similarly, if somebody is attacked because their stance on Palestine, even if we disagree with their views on several other things, there's plenty of examples. I think when it comes to the issue that they've been targeted, not because of those views, but because of Palestine, we need to close ranks around them and defend them. Because seems to be happening now is there is a deliberate attempt to try to divide what has been a pretty united struggle for the last couple of years. And as the horrific scenes are disappearing from our phones and our screens, and people are slowly normalizing the new stage of this occupation, this tends to happen in any movement. And I think it's really important that we have to remember all that we saw, all those sacrifices that were being made on the ground, on the battlefield in Palestine. We can't let that just go in vain. And we have to actually try to draw a line on this and say, look, if anybody, call it a unity pact, whatever, if anyone is attacked because of Palestine, doesn't matter what I think about them or their views about X, Y, and Z, but on Palestine, I'm going to have their back. I'm not going to publicly criticize them. I'm not going to condemn them. I'm not going to distance myself from them. I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to basically protect them. That should be a starting point, and maybe the organizations the various organizations can come together and have that kind of meeting and agreement moving forward.
Tony?
Yeah, I would just make hopefully it's a quick point. I actually think that there is unity amongst the grassroots groups, the PSC groups on the ground across the country, some of which are no longer PSC, but actually in the towns and cities across the country, there is a lot of unity between the different Palestine groups. And, you know, before prescription, there was a lot of people from PSC branches who would support Palestine Action. And when we started Palestine Action, my internal policy, you could say, was to never publicly say anything about what PSC was doing. And there were a lot of attacks, and now the cat is out of the bag, so I may as well. But there were a lot of attacks on Palestine Action, a lot of underhand attacks. And for years, we chose to ignore it and focus on the actions and let the actions speak for themselves. Because while they were trying to disinvite support for Palestine Action, actually people were seeing what we were doing, what the purpose was behind it. And they supported it for that reason. So, you know, beforehand, I would have probably asked the exact same question and thought the exact same way. Surely we all have the same goal. Why can't people work together? But the truth is that when there were certain issues with certain leadership and certain organisation, it becomes impossible to form that. And I think, you know, I don't think there is a simple answer to it. I agree. I never engage in, you know, whatever public attacks on other Palestinians or other groups. But it's undeniable that there have been a number of attacks from a certain direction. And I think those have to be questioned rather than, in order to form unity, you have to get rid of the problem. And there is a problem, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I speak as one of the original founders of Palestine Solidarity Campaign in 1982. I resigned twice, first over the Oslo Accords, and then in 2022, when it removed anti-Zionism from its own constitution. And although it claims to be anti-Zionist now, in practice, it's not. And I do think we have to have a fairly clear message arising out of this genocide, because Israel has lost the battle of narratives, if you like. I mean, for years, people saw Israel as some kind of quasi-democratic state. That isn't the case now. They have open neo-Nazis, Jewish neo-Nazis in their government, including the number 2, Bezalel Smotrich, but a number of others in it. So I think we have to be very clear, because it's often defined as anti-Semitism to say that the Israeli state has to go. It's an apartheid state. It's a state which discriminates on the basis of ethnicity. If you're Jewish, you get certain privileges. If you're not Jewish, then you are not even really a second-class citizen. You're really a guest in someone else's land. So I think we need to be as clear on Palestine as we were on South Africa. We said apartheid had to go, and I say that Zionism has to go. And it's really as simple as that, because there can be no solution in the area as long as the Israeli state remains. It is an expansionist, it's a militarist, it's a racist state. Now, having said that, I also think we need to be very clear about who our targets are. And we know that the Zionists' main form of defense is to accuse us, including Jews, of anti-Semitism. And I don't think we should ever give hostage to fortune. I think we need to be very, very clear that those who are supporting the genocide, those who are weaponizing and arming the genocide, are the imperialist states, the United States first and foremost, but also Germany and Britain. And they use, if you like, their Jewish communities as a kind of moral alibi, a convenient excuse, a pretext for the policies that they have. Imperialism is not a particularly nice creature, whether it's in Palestine or elsewhere in the world. And no one, I think, should get it the wrong way round. No one should think that somehow the Zionist lobby has captured the United States. I think that's really, really dangerous, because if we direct our fire at the wrong target, then we will be of no help to the people in Gaza and in Palestine. Thank you.
Yeah, some really thoughtful responses. Thank you for that, you guys. I think just perhaps I might interject here for a moment and just say, as a South African, and it is also very important for us that the genocide against Palestinians is connected with the genocide against the Sudanese and in Congo and in Haiti, that these are interconnected. Yeah, it's something really important to think about. Okay, the next question is can I ask, Shireen Abdullah says, can I ask what legal actions we are taking to push back against government, maybe with other activist organizations? And then there's a second legal question, which is, can anyone from Habib Rahman, can anyone recommend a lawyer or firm that can help with challenging NHS contracts with Israeli companies? Myself and some colleagues wish to launch a legal challenge, but corporate lawyers tend to defend companies rather than prosecute them. So these two kinds of legal action questions, I guess maybe Fahad, you might be the person to answer that.
Yeah, it's kind of vague, the first one. Legal actions to push back against government. I mean, which there's so much to push back against. I think there is a lot of legal action on the whole Palestine front, whether it's weapon sales, prescription. I think the jury trial is going to be a big one when it comes in. So those actions are going to take place. I think, Shireen, if you could be a bit more specific, I could probably help you a bit better. The second one from Habib is about the NHS contract. This is something actually that came up before. We had a webinar a couple of nights ago with Frank, who you all know. So someone raised something similar with him, and I think he'd asked him to get in contact with us, and we'll see what we can do. So feel free to drop us an email, and we can see if we can help, or we can put you in touch with some people who can help.
Huda?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I mean, maybe I feel this more strongly going through the judicial review for Palestine Action, but it's no secret that they changed the judges in our judicial review last minute. They removed Chamberlain, and they did the exact same thing. The only other time they've done that, it was the same judge that they removed, was in the F-35 case, when they were arguing that exports of F-35 equipment to Israel were unlawful. And I am relatively hopeful that we will win the prescription judicial review, only because there are some arguments which you simply can't fudge, that are too strong for them to find a way around at one point or another, and that it's become inconvenient for them. But I think what has become really clear is that the legal system is kind of, in a sense, there, or these challenges are there. The fact that you can do these challenges gives people a false sense of hope that there can be justice achieved through this system. And, when they remove the judges and they put on Sharp, who has connections to Trevor Chin, the biggest pro-Israel lobbyist in the country. I mean, it was just insane, the amount of links and conflicts of interests that came out from these judges. There was a huge amount of corruption in the judiciary. The F-35 exports case, they weren't allowed to appeal even to the Court of Appeal. Just ridiculous. We know it's unlawful. The law literally states if you send arms and there's a risk of being used against international law, so I think you can use it as a tool, but we have to be really open and transparent to the fact that the legal judiciary system is extremely, extremely corrupt. There is no transparency over judges, who they talk to, what goes on behind the scenes. Most institutions, public institutions, you can send freedom of information requests. You cannot do that when it comes to judges and the courts in this country. So we have to be aware in general of the limitations of the legal system, because I do believe a huge part of how this democracy works is making us believe that these systems are fair, and they are just not.
Thanks, Huda. Fahad?
Yeah, sorry, I've just seen Shireen's follow-up question, and she's talked about the detention without bail for 16 months. And just going again, echoing what Huda says, the system, you can't win political cases in the courtroom. That's the first principle to understand. If the political case, you will not win in the courtroom because that's part of the infrastructure which is designed to suppress you. If you look at this issue about the Filton 24 being held for so long without bail, what has brought the issue to the fore now? Has it been the bail applications, the legal pleadings? No, it's been the fact that they're on hunger strike. It's been that part of the motion, the media campaign around it. You know, all of this is what's needed. Political cases are changed outside of the courtroom. All the courtroom really is a wedge to open the door to allow you to have a platform to talk about something. So it's like Clive Stafford Smith often says, none of the men in Guantanamo Bay would have come home had he just relied on trying to win their cases in a corrupt courtroom. He had to do that to open the door and then carried on with his campaigning outside of the courtroom. So yeah, so I completely agree with what Huda said, that let's understand the limitations, let's understand its function, but don't put our eggs in that basket. Just open the door and then campaign outside of it.
Thank you. And I think that's one of the reasons, just as a gentle reminder, that we are doing this for Tony tonight. And you know, just perhaps as a remembrance that there is a kind of an indivisible sense of solidarity, right? So anybody who is going through this, we need to do this repeatedly with anybody and everybody who goes through this. There have been many messages of love and respect across the in the Q&A. There is one question, Tony, about whether we will share the recording. Some people want to use it for their legal studies at university or couldn't make it today for whatever reason.
Yes, the answer is yes. I will edit it almost as soon as this webinar is ended, but I have to wait for it to be processed. But it will be out as soon as possible. I'll put it on my blog, and Jewish Network for Palestine will put it on its website. So yes, it will be available as soon as possible. I promise.
There is a great question, just a follow-up question from Shireen. She says, thank you, Fahad. In that case, should we look at Italy? Is there a case of working with unions to declare general strikes in support of hunger strikers and protesters?
Oh, absolutely. I think unions have to be mobilized, and anything, but it's strange coming from a lawyer, but anything but the courtroom in one sense is what needs to happen. And Italy is a prime example of how they just brought the place to a standstill to make their point. British people are a bit more conservative, let's say, small c, when it comes to such radical actions. But you need to tap into the heritage, the suffragettes have mentioned. There is a heritage of radicalism that we just need to tap into and realize, you know, it's like the legal system is one of my bugbears. The other one is the political system. People seem to think that, oh, we're going to vote for the Greens or we're going to vote for your party or whoever, and this is going to make a change. It's not. If you have not learned this yet, looking at this Labour government filled with human rights barristers and the stances they're taking, and they still believe that change will come through the ballot box, and you really, really are very naive. And people need to wake up to the reality. Change will not happen from within Westminster. It will not happen within the courtrooms. It will happen on the streets. That's where it has to happen, and that's where we need to be mobilizing.
I think Fahad's right in one sense that having illusions in Parliament is a lost cause in a sense. But I don't think we should ignore the political process. at the next election, I don't doubt that Labour is going to suffer a very heavy defeat. And I think it is important that there are political alternatives which will have representation in Parliament, whether it's the Green Party or the party I'm a member of, which is your party. I don't think we can neglect that. And that it's also a method of winning people's support. I mean, we have a battle on against Farage and reform, and that means we have to get our ideas across as to why scapegoating migrants or refugees is a rich man's game in a sense, because it diverts attention from those who own and control the wealth in this society. So I don't think we can ignore it. But of course, change won't happen in Parliament alone. It has to be mass movements on the street, and that includes trade unions. I mean, the problem with the British working class is it has been historically very conservative. I mean, I think Lenin put his finger on it when he said they from the crumbs from the imperialists' table. In other words, they benefited to some extent from Britain's imperialist role, whereas European working classes, in particular in Italy, but not just Italy, Spain and Greece as well, have been far more radical and prepared to take action. And we have some pretty despicable trade union leaders in this country. Gary Smith of the General Municipal, Sharon Graham of Unite, who've effectively given support to the genocide by stopping solidarity actions within their own unions. And I've also, I mean, I spoke about a month ago with Dockers representatives, shop stewards, and the convener in Felixstowe, which is the major port in Britain. And I got an overwhelming sense of their own weakness, that they actually couldn't go ahead with any form of embargo and not suffer victimizations as a result. So there's been a great change in the British working class and its ability to stand up. So trade unionism itself needs to be rebuilt. Solidarity needs to be rebuilt, and links from the movements such as our own with trade unions are extremely important. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. I see Mike has raised his hand, so I'm gonna unmute you, Mike. Please go ahead and chat. Oh. I don't know. He's not answering. I think we are getting to the end of
Can you hear
our.
me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Mike, we can. Please
Oh,
go
I'm
for
sorry.
it.
It took a while to find the button. I'm sorry. So I'm really sorry. I'll keep it brief. But Tony, the question is directed to you, really. All of your responses, and I love you, comrade. I really think I am, birds of a feather. I support everything you have to say. I'm not Jewish. I'm an atheist, but then so are you.
So am I.
And you're a socialist. But what I want to know is, how do we build unity? What I've heard from you, and I don't misinterpret this. I understand why you have differences with these people, but what I've heard from you is differences with people, why we need to oppose people, why we need to stand against them. And of course we do, absolutely. As a community, we need to have clear political positions that are uncompromising. But how do we build unity with them as well? What is our united or popular front with these people so that we can defeat the right wing? Because at the moment we have Farage and Reform and Yaxley Lennon and all these other bastards, people who are finding a way of working together despite however right wing they might feel they need to be. We don't seem to have achieved that, and I think that's a big obstacle. I don't want to make this into a speech, Tony, but I just want to hear how we can construct a unified platform. Your party, I'm a member of your party, like you are, how we can build a united platform that will defeat these people, because if we don't, we're going to be under a reform government in 2 or 3 years' time.
Well, I think your party is feeling its feet, and there's been some unfortunate quarrels at the top, and in particular Corbyn's refusal to say that there was no anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party, and people like myself, but others, Jackie Walker and so on, were wrongfully expelled, and it was a scam, in essence. It was a hoax, but a hoax designed to lay the basis for the uncritical support of Israel today. How do we
an
build?
effing scam, if you don't mind me saying. I've seen, I've listened to the track, and you're right. But what do we do about it?
Well, I think we build unity from the bottom upwards. We don't build it from the top downwards. And so it's really the unity of people who are taking action and have taken action over Palestine in the last 2 years. But there is no magical solution. And of course, we've seen the far right come out quite clearly in support of Israel. And we do have to tie those knots together and make people aware, if you like, that a Farage government would be an extremely anti-working class government, a government that would cut, which would build the military even further than Starmer wants, and so on. Anti-fascist unity, I think, is a prerequisite, and it can't be dominated by one or other political grouping. So I don't have any magical solution to it, but I think it's up to everyone, if you like, to help forge it. But there are times when we have to be critical. As when PSC was attacking Palestine Action, for example. As when, for example, it's only today put out a message about the hunger strikers. I mean, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which does have a major support, has been extremely lethargic in the ways it's gone about things, and it's given virtually no support to the anti-prescription movement, of which you've been such a magnificent part. So they are my random thoughts, if you like. I don't know whether
I won't talk anymore, but thank you, Tony. That's very helpful.
I don't know how the rest of you are feeling, but it has been a long time in a Zoom. And we just had some excellent comments, really reminding us of grassroots unity building, really thinking about grassroots movement building from the bottom up. Huda, Tony, any other comments, any other thoughts before we end this session and crawl away from Zoom?
I think the only thing really I would say is that people are coming up. It's not just me, it's Richard, I think, will be facing trial, and no doubt many others. I think it's really important to build a sense of solidarity around those who are facing action by the state, and to make it clear, not least to the jury, that people are not being tried as lone individuals. They are part of the movement, and that we will support them. And I think that will help them to gain that perspective, because it's a question of letting the world in on a courtroom, which a judge is doing his or her best to exclude. And if my case and the initial cases are successful, we may well find that the CPS thinks twice about pursuing these cases. I mean, Natalie has already been acquitted in Jersey. It's not quite the same jurisdiction, but if we have initial successes, whether it's actually in the Filton 24, I mean, I think if the first 6 get off, I think they'll think very seriously about pursuing it against the other 18. So all of those, but in the immediate, we need to put maximum pressure on this government to accede to the hunger strikers' demands, and in particular for their release on unconditional bail. I think that is the very least we can do. And that means getting more than just 42 parliamentarians behind what is quite an anodyne statement, but it's better than nothing, that John McDonnell has drawn up.
Yeah, I completely agree. For those of you who can, I think tomorrow is going to be a key date for the hunger strike as well, with the bail apps coming for 3 of them. So if you can get down to the Old Bailey, do get down. I think from 10:30, the bail application starts at 11:30. But you can't underestimate how important it is to have support outside of these court cases. And you're right, Tony. There's a lot of people on Section 12 charges, including yourself, Richard Barnard. People facing serious time for tweets and speeches. It's absolutely insane how many people this has affected, and that they're facing, potentially years in prison. And I'm not just exaggerating there. I don't like to exaggerate, but that's what people are being told. 2 to 4 years, which is what I was told to expect for one speech. Sarah Wilkinson, I think she's got about 5 or 6 different serious terrorism charges for her tweets altogether. It's just absolutely insane what these people are being faced with for posts, and it's selective. People are being targeted, and the way that it's worked has been the pro-Israel lobby has been looking through people's posts, looking through their speeches, reporting en masse to counter-terrorism police, and they have conceded to their requests. And you know, the Solicitor General, as you said, was there to accept them and was there to let it through. So it is extremely important for the morale of the people on trial to see that there is support outside, to make it known that people are against the prosecutions of these cases, that, you know, the people sitting in the courtroom are there for the defendant, not there for the prosecution. I think it's crucial to mobilise as much as possible and to increase the pressure on the hunger strikes, raising it in every single different avenue you can, like Francesca said, taking action, concrete action, now as the hunger strike continues. It's the 6th week for some of them. It's an extremely critical point.
Okay. An important note to end this webinar off on. Be visible, be loud, stand in solidarity, not just behind your keyboard, but in public. Use your voice, use whatever you can. With this, thank you so much, Huda. Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you everybody who came to this webinar. It
And
was
thank you, Nimi, for chairing so lovely.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
it's
Huda.
my pleasure.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. Stay
Bye.
safe and stay courageous.